Welcome, everyone, both here in the room and those watching on the live stream. We're here at the Roundhouse in London for Summit 2019. My name's Joe. His name's Joe. We're both from the MacArthur Foundation, and we're going to guide you through this tour of the circular economy this evening. So over the next 90 minutes, we're going to try and show you what the circular economy looks like. The circular economy has these three principles. You may have heard them. Design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. But it's not just a theory, and it doesn't just exist in a report or a diagram. It's actually happening. People are shifting the economy from linear to circular, and tonight is about them.
But before we get cracking, here is how this is going to work. We want to create a seamless 90-minute experience for those watching in-house and those watching online. But we also want to make sure that people who aren't catching this live are able to access the content. So it means sometimes it might not be so seamless as you have already experienced. Enjoy it, bear with us, and ask questions as we go using the hashtag Summit2019. We will try and put them to the speakers when we can.
So let's get into our first speaker. The circular economy, in essence, is actually a pretty simple notion. You have some materials, some resources, you manage them so you can use them again and again. Well, our next speaker has actually tried that, and it's not quite as simple as it sounds. Ladies and gentlemen, Joaquin Ruiz from Biosphere 2.
Thank you, and very much for having me here, and thank you all for being here. Let me just show you a slide. I'm not sure I can see that there. That's Biosphere 1. Biosphere 1 is sort of the symbol of circular economy, if you think about it. It's been around for 4.5 billion years, and thanks to the stability of the Earth, all of us are around here. If the Earth didn't have the stable atmosphere and the stable lithosphere that it has, it would be like Mars, and it would not have the evolution that we've had in the biology, so that we would end up with a very short time in the whole history of the Earth where intelligent people, most of them, our president excluded, have come up to snuff. So one of the things that has happened in Biosphere 1, in the 4.5 billion years of evolution, is that it's had its up and down. In fact, there was a meteorite that came and hit the Earth and killed all the dinosaurs except for Barney, which is a bad thing. But other than that, the evolution has been sort of constant, except for now. Now we're in a time where we call it the Anthropocene, where humans are the ones that are changing the dynamics of the Earth more than any geologic or cosmologic way. And we know that because the rate of change that is happening today is extraordinary, giving rise to what we call global climate change. And I think one of the reasons why the circular economy is so important. 25 years ago, there were a variety of freethinkers, which usually make things change in dramatic ways. And these freethinkers created Biosphere 2. And Biosphere 2 is a laboratory for the environment, which is large enough that it can be scaled, that things that happen in there can more or less mimic the cycles that the Earth has. It was supposed to be built so that it would control its atmosphere, that people could be in there and live and grow food and need nothing else but an energy to keep the whole thing going. And in fact, after the biosphere was built, again, 25 years ago, with the purpose of creating the knowledge to have the first circular economy. The idea was that everything in there was circulated, that people could live in there for years by starting with some original sort of growing their food, but it would keep on going after they did that, and that it would be in some ways the way that we would be able to go and colonize Mars or the Moon or anywhere else if that was the case. And just to give you a sense of how difficult that is, in fact, and now we call this Earth systems, but how difficult it is to know how the Earth actually works, if you look at that thing, it's not only beautiful, because one of the free thinkers that created it is an architect, but it has an ocean in there, it has a rainforest, it had an area where you grew food. But the problem was that they didn't quite figure out, even though they had an investment in today's dollars of $1 billion, that would have been the investment today, they weren't able to figure out how the soils worked. And the soils sucked up all the oxygen so that the concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere was equal to you living at 20,000 feet elevation, kind of. And they were not able to grow enough food for the calories that they were burning in there. So there were 8 people. After a week of not being able to breathe or eat very well, they became quite grumpy. And you ended up with 2 teams, which is another thing that's quite interesting about experiments like this, things that NASA now is incredibly interested and worried about. How can you send astronauts to the Moon or to Mars and live together when, in fact, their whole personality is a little weird? That's the only reason you'd go to the Mars, or the only reason why you'd be in here for 2.5 years. How do you create teams of people that are all alpha? Think about it that way. So NASA spends an enormous amount of money on that, and the very first experiment, which was done at Biosphere 2, showed how difficult that was. It wasn't created as a psychological experiment, but the experiment clearly dealt with a bit of the psyche. What we do in the Biosphere today, after 25 years, and interestingly enough, probably the most important experiment that was ever done at Biosphere 2, and again, we can do it because of its scale, is in the ocean. This was in the 1990s. We increased, this was after the biospheres were out of the place. We increased the CO2 of the interior of the ocean, of the biosphere, to levels that were 400 ppm CO2. And for those of you that follow global climate change and those kinds of things, today the Earth has a concentration of CO2 of about 400 ppm. In the 1990s, it was about 360. And the thing that happened immediately was that the corals all died in the ocean. They all bleached out. And it was an indication of the things that were going to be happening in the Earth today. There were experiments also in the rainforest that showed how a rainforest can only take about 600 parts per million of CO2, and after that it cannot. So it's not an infinite sink for CO2. It's not a solution for global climate change. Okay, I can do this too. Where? Got it? Okay, thank you. So, so what we do today at Biosphere 2 is research in 4 areas which we consider to be the grand challenges of the environment, 3 of them, and 1 the grand challenge of humankind. We're dealing with the corals. This that says corals shows a picture of the ocean at Biosphere 2. It's the largest ocean inside of a building, where we can control the temperature and we can control the acidity. So we can create corals or systems of corals that can be resilient to the temperature increases that we have in the ocean, which is actually what's killing them. So even though plastics are a problem and the acidity of the ocean, which has gone down, is a problem, the real issue the number 1 issue that's bleaching them is the temperatures. The second thing we're doing is in rainforests, as there was a talk this morning about Brazil and how it's so strange that in the rainforests in Brazil, you get these droughts. What's going to be the fate of rainforests around the world as drought kicks in? How much drought can a rainforest take before they start dying? And the scaling again at Biosphere 2 is such that we can do those sorts of experiments. The third one, which says water, is trying to understand what is the fate of water in desert environments as you change the patterns of rain and vegetation changes. And that's a huge sort of, if you're a researcher, you can consider it maybe boring, but it's incredibly important to quantify the fate of water in semi-arid environments. And the last thing we do is we're working on food security and safety, the relationship of food, water, and energy. We have a program that's absolutely terrific in which we put solar panels, and this goes from schools to places where you grow. Solar panels, instead of putting them in parking lots, we can put them where food is being grown. If you do that, and you live in a desert environment, then the shade of the solar panel will allow the food to grow with less water. The evapotranspiration of the plants to the panels makes the panels more efficient because as panels heat up, they're less efficient. So there's a clearly circular way that we have to deal with food, energy, and water. The second thing we have is we have a scaling project in Mexico City in which we have a project where we have a variety of techniques for growing food that go from mushrooms to crickets to vertical farms. One single farm in Mexico City produces about 40 tons of garbage a day. So we're creating systems in which we take the garbage, which is mostly organic food, organic material and paper waste, de-water it so we can get water out of it. That takes care of about a third of the mass. And then we use the rest of it to grow mushrooms, which are an amazing source of protein. And what's left behind, we use it to grow insects, which is an enormous amount of protein there as well, and followed then by using a vertical farm. And the important thing is that we get rid of about 50% of the refuse of the garbage that creates a lesser problem when you're trying to then compost it. When they first tried in Mexico to compost everything that was coming out of the garbage piles, the flies became a real problem. People forget that. So you have to get the least amount of composting if you're not going to create another issue, which is a problem that we don't want to have. So at Biosphere then, this is a modern biosphere where we're doing these sorts of research projects. If anybody's interested in food, the way that I've described it, or coral issues, the way that I've described them, just give me a ring, and I'll invite you to come and visit. It's truly an amazing place, and in fact, but you can see by the way, you could have seen by the scenery, one of the most beautiful places in the world as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Aris.
You can stay right there for a moment. We've got a couple of questions.
Shit, should I be up?
Firstly, have you seen a film called Biodome?
Sadly, yes.
It's a terrible film.
Sadly, yes.
It's an awful film, but it's kind of about two idiots who get trapped in Biosphere 2.
That's right.
I actually thought it was just a film. How do you make sure that what you're learning now, the experiments that you're doing, how do you make sure they get out there and that people know about them, that that governments, that businesses, farmers can use what you're learning?
It's quite a challenge, isn't it? So we do it in a variety of ways. I'm blessed to be in a place like this where I can describe what's going on, because there are two sorts of populations right now in the world. Those that are about my age and think about the biosphere as a funky experiment with the 8 people in it, which is not what's going on now, and others which are much younger, which don't even know it exists. So I spent a fair amount of time describing it to various stakeholders to see who would be interested in being part of it. The US government, the German government, we have a big project with the various German institutions in the rainforest trying to understand how the rainforest works, again, because it's a unique enterprise. So the Max Planck Institutes are there doing their work. The corals is an international affair that includes people from Australia and people from Hawaii, people from, again, France. We have big partnerships with France. So the scientists, the aficionados know about it. But I think that what we do there is so important that we need to expand who we describe is happening with. I think the projects we're doing with Mexico City, and those are just happening because we've been working with Mexico for a long time. The problems of the desert, lack of water, resiliency, sustainability, are the problems that are going to be happening in all the large metropolitan areas around the world, as it was said this morning. And having the knowledge that we have of dealing with food in an environment that's a desert. In Arizona, in Tucson, we've had 4,000 years of food production. It's one of the oldest places in the U.S. where food production has been grown. In other words, there have been various native cultures that have been growing food there. And for that reason, the UNESCO has called Tucson a food city. It's not because of our great restaurants, which sadly do not compete with London, but we have a history in which we have seed banks of things that can grow in the deserts. And we can take that kind of knowledge into cities where there's food deserts, in fact, and deal with those as well.
And just lastly, we've heard a lot today about experimentation, approaches to innovation. This is a wonderful story. What do you think the moral of this story is? The moral of the Biosphere 2 story?
The moral is a moral of what this foundation is trying to do. If you go through the natural ways in which research and these sorts of partnerships typically occur, where innovation is stifled. I mean, if one goes to the National Science Foundation in the US or the National Institute of Health, you more or less have to have the research done if it's going to be funded. If you want to do high-risk research, which has a high chance of failure, like this is the beginning of the experiment at Biosphere 2, you need to have free thinkers. You need to have organizations like the MacArthur Foundation, this one and the one in the US, that take chances and recognize that those things that are going to be transformative are unlikely to be done by the institutions that we have today.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joaquin Ruiz.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, who here's heard of the Green New Deal? Put your hands up. Yeah, a few of you. A few whoops, I like that. If you need to get up to speed, our next speaker will explain it far more elegantly and eloquently than I can, but it's an idea that reconnects the economy, society, and the environment. And there's been huge momentum around this idea over the past 18 months. And we're lucky to have one of the authors with us here today. Rhiana Gunn-Wright is in conversation with my colleague, Ashima Sukhdev.
It's a little bit of a catwalk. And I will never be Naomi Campbell, so I have to take it when I can get it.
Hi, Rhiana.
Oh my gosh, you're so far away.
I know. Welcome to London. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, I'm so grateful
Good
to
to
be
have
here.
I know you've just landed this morning and are heading out tomorrow. So again, we really appreciate you being out here.
Of course.
Let's start off with the basics. Help Joe out. What is the Green New Deal?
So the Green New Deal is essentially a proposal to tackle what we define as the twin crises of income inequity and climate change at once. So the idea actually, in part, came from the UK. So the UK released, I think the think tank's IPPR, they released a Green New Deal right after the financial crisis. And it sparked some thinking in some of the founders at my org and other folks. And so the Green New Deal came out of that, and now it is an effort to marry the fights against climate change and income inequity, because especially in the States, they really feed one another, right? So we know that more inequity means more emissions, right? People who are wealthier create more emissions. We also know that when there's an ability to sort of protect yourself from climate change and leave other people vulnerable, that means that the ruling class, can you say the ruling class? I don't know.
The elites, I don't know.
The elites are not as motivated to deal with climate change, and it happens in the reverse, too. So climate change affects poor people, especially poor people of color, a lot more in the States. So you can think about Hurricane Katrina. You can think about the wildfires in Paradise, California. Those are folks who most of their wealth is in their homes. When those homes are gone, they don't get that wealth back, right? When their farms go underwater, farms that they've had for generations, that's the end of a family's livelihood, right? And so climate change is steadily increasing the gaps between who has and who doesn't have.
Exactly. So I guess on the Green New Deal, it's essentially a resolution at the moment.
Yeah.
Could you just, for those of us not from the US, just explain where it is in the process? What does it mean by
a resolution?
Yeah.
So it essentially means that the Green New Deal is not law yet. And it also hasn't gone to the floor. So I feel like I'm about to give you all a terrible civics lesson. So we have 3 branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And so a resolution essentially means that the House, it's come to the House and come to the Senate to say that we believe in these things, we want to move forward. And then part of the work that I do is developing the policy so that it can become legislation, go to the floor, become law.
Gotcha. So tell us a little bit about that. What is your role in this? How did you get involved?
Yeah, so I work at a think tank called New Consensus. And so in the US, the Green New Deal sort of fight, struggle, whatever you want to call it, has been largely led by 3 groups. There's a Sunrise Movement. Have y'all heard of the Sunrise Movement? Kind of. So they're a youth movement that is like doing the organizing, the people power part of it. There's another org called Justice Democrats that essentially works with electeds and candidates to do it. And then New Consensus, we develop the policy for the Green New Deal. Because what we have recognized is that there is a real hunger for young people, people of color, to be activists. But once it moves out of that space, everyone's like, okay, now the real adults will come and fix it, which usually means get out, here are the white men. To fix everything. And so New Consensus was designed and is working to sort of fill that gap so that the voices of the people who are making this a movement carries over to the policy and it serves them too. And I came to this work, I actually didn't really work on climate or the environment until this. I did some policy work on environmental justice before, but honestly, in the States, environmentalism can seem sort of like a white issue because it's mostly around nature and animals, and I think it can be divisive sometimes, at least back in the day, where you have sort of Black people getting shot by cops, and the response is not the same as like the polar ice caps melting. And so I think a lot of people of color were like, great, I don't care, or I don't know how this involves me. And I felt the same way, and it was really working on the Green New Deal that helped. And so my background is in sort of the social policy aspects of the Green New Deal, which is why I was brought on to sort of think about those structures and how they intersect and how you can build policy that both decarbonizes and advances equity at the same time.
Great. So building on that, decarbonizing, dealing with equity issues.
Yeah.
Why are we so bad at connecting the dots between those 2 things? So far, it feels like they've been very separate conversations. You've obviously experienced that. So what are we doing wrong?
I think there's a couple of things. The first is that we tend not to think, I think it's changing, but I think sometimes we don't tend to think of climate change as a system or something that's affected by systems, but as sort of like a single issue. But the fact is, like, climate change has everything to do with the ways that we structure businesses, right? The ways that we allow fossil fuel companies to move, which is written into legislation, right? It's about the ways that we structure our economy. So I think that's one thing. And then I think often we have talked about sort of how to stop climate change from a very individual perspective. You reduce, you reuse, you recycle, you take a bus, you don't use a plastic water bottle. And all of that, you know, has a role, but we haven't, I think for sort of the general public, the idea that like climate change, or that the real thing that you want to do is sort of move systems is new. And then I think the last thing is, I think, this is just a theory, is that I think folks have not taken people of color seriously as environmental voters or actors. And so it's also been treated as like a thing that people of color, especially if they don't have a lot of money, won't care about. Despite the fact that they're more likely, based on polling and studies, to care than other groups. But I think sort of we've left them behind. And so I think outside of the environmental justice movement, there's been a real sort of struggle to figure out how do you frame these issues in a way that connects. And really not a lot of tension into how you do that.
Got it. And how are you trying to do that now with this process as you're writing the policies that will go into the Green New Deal as it is?
So one of the first things that's caused a lot of consternation is that the resolution came out and it didn't specify any policy specifics, right? It laid out projects that we need to do, work that needs to be done, principles, but no concrete policy. And that was for two reasons. One was to start a conversation, right? From like just the presentation we just had, we know that we have the knowledge to sort of fix these systems, right? So it's about knowing what's happening and getting resources to that. And you can't do that if you are deciding on high what's going to happen, nor can you hear from communities that are really affected. So that's one. And then the second reason was that we didn't want to break a coalition, right? To actually pass something like the Green New Deal in the States, where the political landscape is so fractured, you need to have a broad coalition that can withstand sort of difference. And if you come out with policy specifics from the very beginning, particularly if you haven't done consultations with communities of color, frontline communities, et cetera, you're breaking your coalition before you even started. Because people already feel like they weren't involved, this wasn't for them, this didn't concern them, and it's the same thing that happened before. So that's one of the ways that we're doing it, is sort of slowing down the process. Our process at New Consensus is really consultative, so we're building like advisory groups. 50% of those advisory groups have to be people from frontline or vulnerable communities. So folks will be directly impacted. At least 50% have to be women. At least 50% have to be people of color, right? And so that is, and you don't get double credit for women of color. And so that is slowly changing. That's going to change the solutions that we come up with. That's going to change the way that we think about the problems. So that's sort of the first way that we're thinking about, that we're working on doing that. But it's really about sort of opening up the policy process to allow more voices to speak in and shape.
And what's the voice of business in all of this? So today here, we've had a lot of big corporates, a lot of really great startups are going to be presenting soon. How have you been involving them in this conversation about decarbonization and equity? Yeah,
so we are really interested in involving business, although that generally shocks people when I say. They expect me to be like, get out. But, you know, their money is green too. And so, or multicolored here. And so business has a huge role to play because the Green New Deal is expansive, it's comprehensive, and so much of what will allow this to happen is businesses being involved and investing. Because at least in the States, there are billions, if not trillions of dollars waiting to be invested once the federal government sets a clear decarbonization strategy and plan. Because people are not going to change their business models if they don't know if the market will exist the next year, right? Or the next 5 years, next 10 years. And so they have a huge role to play. We involve them as experts, right? We consult with them, we will talk to them, because the fact is that our model is World War II, which was a very sort of public-private partnership. And we're aiming for the same thing. The only difference is that we don't want government to continue to be the handmaiden of the private sector. There has to be equal partners sharing, and the government does have the right and the role to set regulations, to set the sort of playing field. And so we embrace that, but of course that still means that the private sector has a role, and quite a big role to play. We can't produce all the things we need for a Green New Deal without a private sector. We can't fund innovation the way that we need without a private sector. We can't train workers and get them jobs without a thriving private sector. So there is no universe in which the Green New Deal works without business involvement and a very active private sector.
Yep, definitely. One common criticism that the Green New Deal seems to be getting, and a lot of ideas in this space get, is that this is ridiculous. This is going to cost way too much money. We just can't afford that right now. What's your response to that?
I mean, I was like, what is a helpful response to that? Because I think there's a couple of responses. One is that when most people are dead, they can't spend that money anyway. So what are you saving it for? But I think the other response is that this is an investment program, right? We are talking about investing in the next generation of businesses. We're talking about investing and changing our economy so it is more circular, right? And that takes money to change it, right? So these are investments that mean that they will give dividends, they will give returns in terms of economic growth or jobs, what have you. And the alternative of inaction is not only is it expensive, that money is just, you are basically clogging a leak, or like, I don't know, I'm not a carpenter,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
whatever. You're plugging a leak, right? And so the money that you spend when climate disasters happen, once that's over, that money's gone. That's not an investment, right? When your coasts are underwater, you're losing money. That's not an investment. You're not getting a return on that. And so the alternative is like, yes, it will cost money, but it will actually give us something in the end versus inaction, which is essentially just bleeding until you die.
I'm not going to end on that note. One last question for you.
I mean, some of us won't die.
Exactly. We'll be fine.
Some of us will be fine.
So I guess last question for you. What's next? Where do we go from here? What is it actually going to take to get this over the line?
So it's going to take a few things. So the first is continued pressure and political capital. And I think that's something that sometimes makes people uncomfortable because, I don't know, at least in the States, there's this mindset of like, you just ask really nicely until someone gives it to you, but we ain't got time for that anymore. Yeah. So, but pressure does build political capital, and the more this becomes an issue, the more people have to move. Yep. So that has to happen. The second is, we obviously need a supportive, hopefully, presidential administration, a supportive Congress. And then, of course, we also have to move the world of ideas, which is part of what New Consensus does. Because in addition to writing policy, which obviously has to happen for it to get to the floor, we have to be able to make or help shape an intellectual space where people can be grappling with these ideas in a way that matches the scale and scope of the problem. And that means widening the ways that we think about things, changing some paradigms, right? Introducing new worldviews. And that is sort of background work, but that has to happen for these ideas to be taken seriously and make it to the next level.
Definitely. Well, we wish you the best of luck. You have all of our support. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, of course, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ash and Rhiana. Okay, this is where we get a little bit experimental. We're going to go on a tour of the venue to hear a series of stories that show the circular economy in action. We've got cars, we've got beer, we've got clothes, we've got headphones, and we've got Kabadiwallas. Over to the safe hands of Colin Webster, who is standing next to a man and a car.
Thank you, generic host. Some people find it hard to park in London, but not this guy. Hugo Spowers of Riversimple Cars. You said to me this car is an electric vehicle without a battery. What on earth does that mean?
Yes, so it's got electric motors in all four wheels. It runs entirely electrically. It's zero emissions, but we have no batteries at all on the car. And all the energy is stored in hydrogen, which passes through a fuel cell, creating electricity on demand.
But you told me also there's something interesting about the hydrogen fuel cell in this vehicle, something a bit different.
Yes, well, it's really the architecture of the car that's different. So the fuel cell actually is from forklift. It's only an 8.5 kilowatt fuel cell. It can not quite power 3 domestic kettles. Wow. And it's made for forklifts for Walmart warehouses. And the different thing is the way in which we built the hydrogen car. So most of the major motor manufacturers have got hydrogen fuel cell programs, but they're trying to squeeze fuel cells into conventional cars and get them to behave like petrol engines, which they really don't do very well. Whereas we've had the only advantage of being a startup company is we've got a clean sheet of paper. So we've completely revised the way in which you build a car. It's a completely different architecture, a new pattern of relationships. And so the fuel cell provides the electricity for the motors. They then are also the brakes, and they charge a bank of capacitors that's regen braking. The Toyota Prius and lots of other cars have regen braking.
What does that mean, regen? We talk about regenerative as part of the MacArthur Foundation.
Yes.
Regenerative braking, what on earth is it?
It's a matter of recovering the energy and storing it for later reuse. And the Toyota Prius, for instance, has regen braking. The most you'll ever get back into the battery is about 10% of the kinetic energy of the car. We can get over 50% of the energy back into the capacitors. And that means that we can rely on the capacitors for 3/4 of the power required when you're accelerating. And the fuel cell can then can be a very small fuel cell, that size simply for the maximum constant speed.
I'm nodding and I'm pretending I'm understanding most of what you're saying. But I think the thing that's really fascinating for me about this vehicle isn't necessarily the technology, because I don't understand it. It's the business model and the design. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the model is designed to align interests between us as a company and the needs of society, the constraints of the planet, regulatory trends, and the interests of customers. We'll never sell a car. We will only ever sell a performance contract, a subscription service, rather like a mobile phone. So typically customers will sign up for a 3-year contract, and it's got a fixed priced element monthly and a mileage rate, like a usage rate on a mobile phone. And that is the only transaction you have in having access to the car. You don't have to haggle with the insurance company because it's included. Right. When you fill up with fuel, you don't pay, we do. And it completely changes the car that we design. It affects every aspect of the business, to be honest.
But that's not untypical, because actually most cars on the road are on a sort of hire purchase or a leasing arrangement anyway. What was it, 90% you told me before?
Yes. I mean, leasing we avoid as a term, like the plague, because people think they understand what it means. And quite frankly, leasing is a mechanism to persuade people to buy a car when they can't really afford it and don't need it. And it's a mechanism to keep on churning product out of the factory gates in a sale of product model. In our case, I think the two principles, which I think are the two principles to really get the maximum economic and environmental benefit out of circularizing your business are one, that the product stays on our balance sheet from a clean sheet of paper when we design it, right the way through to end of life. And secondly, we internalize all operating costs on that same P&L. So it covers everything. It is the only transaction you have, and you know exactly what your cost of motoring is going to be if you know what mileage you're going to do, 10,000 miles a year, and you can work out the price. Even with a second-hand car. So if you take a 10-year-old car from us, it will still be as reliable as a new one, otherwise we wouldn't supply it to you. It has no moving parts other than the wheels, and all the structural materials are inert.
Steering wheel, surely.
Yes, no high-speed moving parts. The pedals move as well.
Okay, so you said perhaps this is 10 years this car would last for, or is it longer? How many users do you think would use the...
We model over a 15-year economic life because the average car life is 13 and a half in the UK. Sadly, it's been 13 and a half for the last 4 decades. And it used to be corrosion that took cars off the road. It's now black boxes failing. However, we believe that we'll get a much longer revenue stream out of this. This is not a product we're building to sell. It's a revenue-generating asset that sits on our balance sheet. So instead of obsolescence, our interest is longevity. Instead of high running costs, our interests are low running costs. It gives us a direct incentive to improve efficiency because we're paying for the fuel for the life of the car. So it's worth investing in efficiency.
That's that alignment of incentives, incentive for you to keep the costs down, make it efficient.
Yes.
Let's have a big woo moment amongst the audience. Pop open this door. It's a lovely mechanism here. Look at this. How about that, people? Woo! Tell us about the cost of producing this car, Hugo, because there's an interesting story behind that as well, isn't there?
Yes. I mean, these ones, we are building our first production run of 20 vehicles going into a beta trial, but in volume production, they'll be an awful lot cheaper to build than they are at the moment. However, because this is a revenue-generating asset on our balance sheet, the price that we charge in the marketplace for a profitable business is not governed by the build cost of the car. If you sell cars, doesn't matter what technology it is, if you're trying to move away from combustion engines to batteries or hydrogen or anything, it's low volume, supply chain costs are much higher, and all new zero-emission cars carry a premium in the marketplace. In our case, though, we're never selling the car. So we're competing on the basis of lifetime cost, not build cost. And that includes all the operating cost and the end of life. The industry regards that as a €200 liability, but because we know the car is going to be ours when we start designing it, right through to end of life, we design that for maximum recovery of value. It becomes a credit on our balance sheet. Also, we designed it to minimize those operating costs because we're paying them, and to lengthen that revenue stream because it's a revenue-generating asset. So those 3 things, longer revenue streams, lower operating costs, and higher value recovery, offset a higher build cost, allowing us to come to market at no premium over a conventional car, despite the fact that our costs, supply chain costs, are still much higher.
And the cost to the customer on a sort of monthly basis is around £500 a month. How does that compare with the hire purchase?
We're talking about indicatively £370 a month and 18p a mile. If you do 10,000 miles a year, that works out about £500 a month. And we're benchmarking against the total cost of ownership of a bottom-of-the-range diesel Golf. Now, people tend to think only of the £225 a month they pay in their PCP. But in fact, if you look at the total costs for the first 3 years of ownership of a bottom-of-the-range diesel Golf, depending on whether you buy it through a PCP or a lease or whatever, it varies between £490 and £550 a month. So we're aiming to match that cost of ownership. Of course, we're not used to bundling costs together, and we all collude really with the industry, not knowing how much our cars really cost us. But we think, and so one of our big challenges is explaining to people that this is an equivalent cost of ownership. We want to take price off the table as a reason to take or not take one of our cars.
There's another challenge, though. It's around the fact you use hydrogen, and hydrogen fuel cells there aren't many terminals in the UK where one could refill this car. Tell us a bit about that challenge and how you might overcome it.
Well, I think this is one area where we feel that there hasn't been enough thought put into the transition strategy. Any disruptive technology always has to come into market in a niche below the radar where the weaknesses don't matter, and the key weakness is infrastructure. And it's all very well like Toyota are doing and Hyundai, and it's brilliant cars they're producing, but they're intercity capable motorway limos, and you need 300 filling stations, and they're saying, well, poor little us, we can't afford 300 filling stations. So we are targeting this specifically at local vehicle use. There's somewhere between 3 and 5 million cars that never go outside a 25-mile radius. That's the market we're targeting. And if that's the market you're after, you bring your critical scale of infrastructure down from 300 to just one filling station, and it creates a commercial market. It's a small market, but it's commercially viable. You put in a filling station somewhere like Oxford, and we put in 50 cars. Anybody in that area who has a reason to come into Oxford once a week is a potential customer. And by concentrating the market, there's a business case for investing in that one filling station that's independent of the 300 others you need. And you can expand the market one filling station at a time and develop the skeleton of a nationwide network without ever taking that nationwide gamble.
And as that one filling station gets busy, there's an economic case for another one, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
I think we've got time for one final question around your supply chain, because you wanted to build in circular principles through the supply chain too. Tell us about that.
As I said, aligning interests, we want to align interests with our suppliers. If you buy components, you want to buy it as cheap a price as possible, as long a life as possible, and the supplier wants as high a price as possible, with as short a life as possible. So the relationship between the supply chain and the auto manufacturers is not great. However, we want to actually pay for the service of the components. We never want to buy fuel cells. We want to pay fuel cell suppliers for the kilowatt hours of electricity. Pay for the time we have the fuel cell, the time it's running, and pay them a premium for the efficiency with which hydrogen's convert into electricity. We want them to do the same with the membranes in the fuel cell of people like Johnson Matthey, who make membranes. And we want Johnson Matthey not to buy platinum from Anglo American, who mine platinum, but to lease the platinum. And by doing this, it aligns the interests of all the players in that system. You can draw an envelope around the 15-year life of the fuel cell, of the car, and you have a shared interest in what is the cheapest way of delivering that service.
Hugo Spowers, thank you very much. Okay, over to something that is just as appealing. Vicky on the main stage.
Thank you. You might think that little red cars are, I mean, they are, but you might think they're one of the coolest things happening in circular economy, and we've got something just as exciting here. I'm Vicky, and I'm joined by Enrica I mean, you might have noticed, actually, her beautiful scarf. I'm just going to draw attention to it, because I've heard that it is made from orange peel. I'm going to hold up this as well, because it is pretty spectacular as well.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm Enrica. I'm from Italy, and I'm the co-founder of Orange Fiber. We basically transform the byproducts of oranges into sustainable materials for fashion. So we have patented a process to transform whatever is left after your morning juice into a fiber that can be used for fashion. And it's not rival to food, because we take it after the juice is squeezed, and we actually prevent byproducts to be disposed.
So we've heard a bit about orange fiber, but how exactly is it made?
We actually work with the squeezer, and we extract a cellulose from the peels of the oranges. So that cellulose is then turned into a yarn, whether a staple fiber or a continuous filament, and then we weave it in Como, in the silk district back in Italy, and then we sell it to brands that then dye it or print it, or then finishing it as they want. So they can either print it, as in this case, or they can work in a jacquard, as in this case, for instance.
You know, it is spectacular. So we've seen two items here that are looking very polished and very clean, but did you have any disastrous prototypes or serious challenges along your way to getting here?
Well, we always had. When you start from lab, everything is under control. But when you start from like that small grams to 1 kilo, and then from 1 kilo to 1 ton, anything can happen. So when we started, we just had a small sample made in the lab of the university back in Milan, and all the way to make a big production of over 2 tons, everything happened. So we had like the lab saying, oh, what are you like sending us, this is just dry juice. It's like, no, 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 no. Okay, we did it so many times, and finally we had something that was accepted by the fashion industry, and now the big challenge is how we make it scalable, how we really create an alternative that can be undertaken by a lot of brands and not just a few high-end luxury brands.
And you do have an example of where you have worked with a really, really big brand. How did you work with them, and how did you scale the product?
Yeah, so the first client ever was Salvatore Ferragamo, and they are an Italian brand, and they decided to launch a capsule collection with us back in 2017, and we produced for them more than 10,000 meters of fabric. And after that, we launched this last April 2019, this unique garment actually in a conscious exclusive from H&M, yeah. And this one has gone sold out within 1 hour. It was put online, and actually H&M decided to adopt this idea and actually piloting it in their supply chain after a collaboration that dated back in 2015 and started with winning the Global Change Award from H&M Foundation, not the group, that it's awarding innovation trying to make fashion more circular.
And so how did you get into this? What was your journey?
A totally different life. So I have a background in communication, and at the time when my co-founder asked me to support her with this product, I was basically working in development cooperation, so United Nations Development Program somewhere in Egypt. So it was totally different life, but I've always been very fascinated by sustainability. That was more social, this is more environmental, but at the end of the day, fashion is something that we use to express ourselves and the values we believe in. So for me, it has become a way to make people more aware of our environment and how our choices are actually changing the world and can change the world.
And so what is next for Orange Fiber?
Well, we are right now doing an equity crowdfunding campaign. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but it's like crowdfunding, but you buy stakes of the company, basically, on a platform. And this is for increasing our production capacity back in Sicily, because we work in Sicily at the time, but we have also extended our patent in all of the countries where the orange juice is made. So next step is to scale up the production. We have a minimum step that is already achieved with fundraising that was for a 30-ton production. And so next one will be 60-ton production. So we are running after that for 2 more weeks. And so scaling is the real next thing for us.
And finally, where can we buy products or get our hands on products that Orange Fiber?
Following our social media, we'll keep you posted. We launched just yesterday a collaboration with a fashion house back in Italy that is doing ties for men. Actually, they are hand-printed in the UK, so it's an Italian fabric, but then hand-printed here. So this will be the next product released. We think within 6 to 9 months available on the market.
And we'll keep our eyes out for more collaborations as well. If it's sold out within an hour, I know I need to be quick off the mark. Enrica might not say, but they're actually also looking for fundraising as well.
Yeah, with this equity crowdfunding campaign. So if you are curious, you can just look for Orange Fiber brand, and you'll find all the information.
Amazing. Thank you. So you heard it here first. Clothes made with the bits left over from your morning orange juice. Thank you, Enrica. And we're going to have some samples. Perfect. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Miranda to talk about something just as exciting. Thank you. Woo!
Do you want to start?
Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Vicky. Nietzsche once said, "Without music, life would be a mistake." I want to introduce Tom and Dorus, the co-founders of Gerrard Street. So, Tom, Dorus, what is Gerrard Street?
Gerrard Street was built upon the notion that we throw away 40 billion kilos of electronics each year. And these are full of valuable components and materials that can be reused, but instead they are now shipped mostly to developing countries where they are burned. So we thought we can do better, right? So we took on the challenge, we developed this top quality headphone. It would normally cost about 350 euros, but we offer it for 10 euros a month instead. And the cool thing is, as you can see, it's fully modular. So if a part breaks, you don't throw away the entire headphone, but we'll just ship a new part to you. And even better, we will retrieve all the old parts, and where possible, we reuse them in order to make new headphones and upgrades. So this means basically for the client, they have the assurance that they have a headphone that is always working and is always up to date. But also for us, we have an incentive to keep improving the headphone and making sure it's the best it can be, because you as a client can cancel at any time.
Okay. Is this a record-building time for the...
Within a minute, I think.
Yeah. Great. Why did you choose to focus on the headphone?
Good question. Me and Dorus are true music lovers. Dorus plays the piano, I play the saxophone, and we listen to music all day long, and we took our headphone wherever we went. But that also meant that we threw away a lot a year, I think 2 or 3. And we want to solve that problem, and that's why we built this headphone. And we know that broken headphones aren't the world's biggest problem, but we were looking for an accessible and popular product which can showcase that circular electronics can be built.
Okay, great. And if I really, really wanted to buy one, would you sell it to me?
No.
So I can only get it on a subscription?
Yeah, no, that's the whole thing. So the unique thing is that you can't buy it, but you pay for the performance, and because we truly believe that that's the future for electronics.
Okay. So I'd be buying into the concept of Gerrard Street. Why is it called Gerrard Street?
It's a funny story, actually. The first headphones that came to market right here in London in 1895, and you also couldn't buy these headphones, so they were installed at your home.
Back in 1895?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You paid £5 a year, what I think was quite a lot. And you were hooked on to all the opera houses and churches in the neighboring area, so you could listen to live music. And now the operator that connected you to one of the opera houses, they were stationed at the Gerrard Street, so hence the name.
Interesting. And how have you found it building up the market around the product?
We didn't start by designing our own headphone, because the most newest thing was the subscription model, so we wanted to test that firstly. So we bought in really high-end headphones, around 250 euros, and we offered them for 5 euros a month, and I think within 1 week we had 26 clients, and we asked them why they want to subscribe to such a service, and afterwards we started a crowdfunding campaign, and there we get our first 400 customers on board.
Okay, great. And then how much retention have you had? Are they still with you?
Most of them are. We have a retention of about 3% a month.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Of the new customers coming in.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And at the moment, I think it's only available in Holland, is that right?
That is right, but I must say we are looking for partners to scale up abroad, potentially here in the UK.
Okay, great. So if anyone's listening,
if there's anyone in the room,
has some of the things that you need,
wants to store all the headphones for us.
And I mean, it's modular. Also, it's a very flat pack. What's the story behind the shipping being like this?
It fits through to the mailboxes in the Netherlands. I have to be honest, we started with this just because it saves a lot of money. It's an easy way to ship the components without having huge shipping costs. But then we found out that customers also really like the idea. So you build your own headphone. It's kind of like an IKEA box.
Yeah.
We thought, can we do that? Isn't that a kind of cheap way for the clients? But they actually like it. They think it's good marketing.
Okay, great. And what in your journey? Because how long have you been going for?
I think we started the idea about 5 years ago. Then it took, of course, quite some developing time. We were both in college still. And the first headphone that we launched, it's a previous model. We launched it 3 years ago.
Okay. What are some of the surprising things that you found along the way? I imagine there have been surprises, bumps, highs.
First of all, that sustainability isn't a selling point at all. So people are interested in high-quality products, and they want a hassle-free service. So that's why we developed a high-end headphone, and you can quit every month. And that's also something we learned. We started with a yearly subscription, but we lowered the barrier to subscribe. So now we have a monthly subscription, so users can quit whenever they want.
Okay, so it's really flexible, actually. Yeah. So I don't need to worry about being tied in for too long.
Not at all.
Is there a period at the beginning where it's longer? Or
no, you can test 1 month, and if you think it's not for me, you can quit.
And at that point, even if I've only done it for a month, I'm still returning it to you.
Yeah.
So okay. Yeah.
And we clean it up, put new paddings on it, and a new user will use the headphone.
Okay. And through the design, have you discovered, like, have you made any material changes as you've gone? Has that been part of working with modularity and?
So far, not that much. We chose a particular plastic that can be recycled well, but we changed more in the design of the headphone. So, for instance, we had a cable that went both ways, and it had a mini XLR. It's kind of a technical connector, but the thing to remember is that it's really durable, the connector. But then we found out that if you have a cable like this, you'll get stuck behind, for instance, a door knob or whatever.
Okay.
So the cables broke all the time. So we got rid of it. Now the cable only goes to one side. Another thing is we went to wireless, so that saves also a lot of cables. What else?
So it's sort of been user testing along the way.
Yeah. The paddings came off really easily. So now we changed it. It's kind of a lock system. Okay, it's locked.
Okay, here we go.
There it is. So it's more stuff like that. And I think one of the key learnings that we found in terms of recyclability is you really have to have a lot of volume before this gets interesting.
Okay.
So at some point we had about 1,000 cables, I think. We went to a company to see if they could recycle it. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, we only start from 100 kilos of cables. So, well, that's it. We took the box back. We still keep it.
And where you are now, 5 years down the line, what are the things that keep inspiring you to keep building this project and taking the company forward?
Good question. I think we really want to propel the circular economy. I think there's already a lot of research done and a lot of knowledge available, but now it's time to start doing. Mm-hmm. And we really think this should be done by small initiatives like startups. They need to pave the way for the large company. We need to test new markets. We need to test more products, and that's how we started Gerrard Street. So.
Have you built an ecosystem around you, or where do you bounce ideas around as you're testing out the next challenge?
Yeah, definitely. We've been in numerous incubators, been talking to a lot of other startups, both startups that are in sustainability, but also startups that are completely doing something else. Okay. And I think that's really crucial to not stay within your niche, but you know, you can learn from any other business. We could also learn something from Shell, I think. So why not talk to them?
Okay, great. So as a parting question, you've obviously developing the circular economy business model. If there are others in the room who are thinking of getting started, what advice would you give to the next entrepreneur who's going to make it on circular economy, that is?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, remember if you're starting a circular business, it's still a business. So we strongly feel if you can't scale it, then you will never have impact. And so don't overemphasize on the sustainability aspect, but make sure that your business is scalable, that you have market demand. Far too often we've been in incubators where there were people with great ideas. They spent all their time and money on making a product that was perfectly sustainable, perfectly green. And then when it was time to sell it, they found out that nobody wanted it because it was either too expensive or it didn't solve an issue. And I think that's the biggest pitfall for circular or even all the sustainable startups today.
Okay, great. Do you have any extra reflections you want to add into that from your
I think
experience?
Doris is quite right, and yeah, and that's what we say. That we didn't design the headphone firstly. We just bought in to test the value proposition.
Okay.
Are people willing to buy it? And that's the first thing we tested instead of making a headphone.
So you've really taken that iterative approach.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing the product with us. Hopefully others are inspired to get into the market. I think we're over to Seb for key musical accompaniment, wherever he is.
Thank you, Miranda. So we've all heard the expression, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. What you might be less familiar with is when life gives you bread, make beer. Tristram, it's my pleasure to have Tristram Stuart with me today, co-founder of Toast Ale and the food waste charity Feedback. Tristram, what are we drinking here?
This is beer made in the most ancient way that beer has been made. Indeed, beer was invented as a way of preserving calories in grains, bread, that would otherwise be wasted. And what we're doing with Toast Ale is bringing beer back to its true origins. We're getting bread, industrial scale bread that is perfectly fresh, but is going to be wasted, the crusts of sandwiches from sandwich manufacturers, and we're putting that into breweries, combining that with a totally natural and traditional way of making beer, but replacing the grain that you'd otherwise have to grow with waste bread and turning it into craft ale.
And so it's the exact same process.
Yeah.
And when you say ancient, how ancient?
The ancient Mesopotamians invented beer thousands of years ago. The first ever beer made was, in fact, we got this idea from a wonderful brewery in Brussels, the Brussels Beer Project, and they called their bread beer Babylon, named after the ancient Mesopotamians. And Toast Ale is really a way of scaling up that problem. When I first learned that you could make beer with bread, having in my life campaigned on food waste, seen bread waste on an industrial scale all over the world, I said, look, it's great that you're doing it here in Brussels, but I've seen bread being wasted in huge quantities on every continent. Craft beer making is now all over the place. I've spent 20 years building a global food waste movement. Let's bring these three things together and make Toast Ale with locally sourced waste bread all over the world. And so that's what we're doing.
You've alluded, obviously, to your history with the topic. Where did that start? How did you begin to identify food waste, an issue that you had to tackle?
Oh, gosh, yes, that takes me back a while. I've always
Not as far as the Mesopotamian era.
Not quite. So I've always been an environmentalist. When I was a teenager, I was actually recycling the food waste from my school kitchens. I used to take it home and feed it to my pigs, the local bakery, the supermarkets that were wasting potatoes because they were the wrong shape or size. I realized that a perfectly good food was being wasted on a huge scale. I started eating it myself. I eventually, got around to kind of launching a one-man campaign on this. This is back in 2002 when supermarkets didn't talk about food waste. They brushed it under the carpet. Government had no policies on food waste. The UN wasn't talking about it. We've now moved so far from that. Food waste didn't used to exist. It's now, there's an SDG, of which I'm a champion, to halve food waste by 2030. You can't be a big food company without having food waste policies. And we're seeing innovation all over the world, entrepreneurs and other innovators coming into the food waste space. But I eventually wrote the book, Waste, Uncovering the Global Food Scandal, launched what became a global movement to tackle food waste, founded a charity, Feedback, that you mentioned. So food waste has been kind of recycling the message of food waste in lots of different ways, has been my whole life, I guess. Toast is just a new way of doing that and telling a story about how much perfectly good food is being wasted, but upcycling that tragedy into something that we can celebrate, into delicious, tasty beer, and also generating money. 100% of our profits go to the charity that I founded. So
I was going to ask a bit about the role of Toast in that. The statistics that come out on food waste are always sort of astonishing, aren't they? About a third of all food is wasted, and that doesn't necessarily even account some of the food or stuff that's wasted in the production phase of producing the food. So, what role does Toast play as that sort of story piece that goes out into the market and helps people start thinking about these issues?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I've been campaigning on food waste, and you know, you have to constantly innovate and tell new stories to keep the press and the public alive. And this is really a way of accessing a whole new audience with our message. Every bottle carries a message, both within it and on the packaging, about food waste and what we need to do about it. We say that bread shouldn't be wasted. Neither should you. Drink responsibly.
Don't tell me what to do, Tristan.
all the crumbs, all the puns are going to come out now, aren't they? It's a way of celebrating the great solutions that are out there, and turning it into something that is palatable and delicious. But the origin is not with that. It's with anger and pain, actually. I first visited a sandwich manufacturer that was making sandwiches for M&S in 2008, finally got in there, and saw 13,000 slices of day-fresh bread being wasted in that single factory. This was in 2008, food price spike owing to over-demand in wheat in the world market, leaving Pakistanis, who I also visited in the same year, without enough bread to eat. And we were contributing to that problem. So I guess my aim has been to take that ecocidal, sociopathic behavior that our industrial food system has generated and continues to perpetuate the world over, driving species extinction, deforestation, and famine, and turning that into something that instead both builds solutions into that system, generates money for the organizations that are trying to fix that system, and, well, frankly, something that, brings us together around a bottle of beer.
Say that stat again. That's 13,000 slices of bread in that one
factory. Yeah, they were throwing away the end slice and the first slice inside each end slice. 4 slices for every loaf going into that factory, because M&S have such perfection kind of around the display of sandwiches. You never see sandwiches with the end slice or even the one inside. And
that's the best bit.
Yeah, arguably it is, and I wish they made sandwiches with it, and we did try to convince them to do that. Yeah. I've had an ongoing battle with them. I am pleased to say, one of the things that we did at Toast Ale is open source our recipe, because we want to collaborate. We're brewing Toast Ale in 7 countries now, and hopefully that will continue to grow. It will become a global company. But we recognize that some people are going to want to go it alone. So we open sourced our recipe. It's been downloaded 50,000 times. Home brewers, craft brewers, micro brewers, but also industrial brewers have been using it. And M&S copied us. They obviously felt the pain when I campaigned on their bread waste, and they're now producing a bread waste beer of their own, as are Iceland and a bunch of other retailers and brewers around the world. So we're trying to change the whole system, not just be a brand.
I was going to ask you a little bit about the scale of Toast Ale. You mentioned 7 countries. How much take-up have you had of the...
Well, in the UK, we are stocked nationally by Tesco's, Waitrose, some of the big national pub chains. We are generally available. We're still a tiny company, though. We've brewed 1 million slices of bread into beer now. If you stack that up, it would go 1.5 times the height of Everest. But just to put it in perspective, we did a calculation that is kind of approximately true, but it gives you an idea. If, hypothetically, we were able to capture all of the bread currently being wasted in the UK, you could brew almost all of the beer being drunk in the UK using our recipe. That's the scale of waste. And that's why we've done more than just produce our own beer. We've tried to get the brewing industry the world over, and irrespective of whether Toast continues to grow in the way that it is at the moment, continues to generate lots of money, as well as saving bread, irrespective of what happens to our company, we have definitely put the recovery of bread and putting it into the brewing system on the map. Brewers, like I say, the world over are now following this recipe, and that's not going to go away.
What's your biggest challenge?
Well, obviously, this is one tiny, weeny part in the overall effort to put an end to the mass species extinction event that we're in the middle of. I spent 2 weeks on the streets of London with the Extinction Rebellion, feeding all the rebels on the streets every day. Our challenge is, how do these individual actions, great entrepreneurs, great campaigning organizations like Feedback, and the big ones. How do we stop being little isolated great stories and become the total economic and social transformation that we need to stop ripping the heart out of planet Earth? And at the moment, we're still going in the wrong direction, I'm afraid to say.
And do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that ambition cannot be high enough. You know, transforming the global brewing industry sounds like a big ambition, but it's not enough. Creating a circular economy and materials is a great ambition, but it's not enough. And we have to aim now to come together like mycelial connections and emerge as the superorganism that we really could become. And an ambition less than that isn't really worth fighting for.
That's a very poignant point to finish on, Tristram. Thank you for your time. And hopefully some of those collaborations can take place tonight over a bottle of Toast Ale.
We have a crowdfunder. Anyone can get involved in that. Go onto Toast Ale's website and be part of this drinkable solution to food waste and the ecocidal event.
So, thank you, Tristram. So many of the stories we've heard so far tonight have been European-focused. But what does the circular economy look like in other contexts? Just one of those stories, I've got my colleague Olivia Finch.
Thanks, Seb, and hello, everyone. Well, we're here. We don't have a bottle of delicious beer to kick back with like Seb. We don't even have any props.
Yep.
But that is okay, because I don't need any alcohol or sexy cars to get excited about our next circular economy story. I'd like to introduce you to Siddharth Hände. He is the CEO and founder of Kabadiwalla Connect. And I'm going to leave Sid to tell you all about Kabadiwalla Connect and what it does. But I just want to say first that the reason I'm super excited to have Sid here is because the work that he's doing is really, as Seb was saying, it's really highlighting the massive opportunity that exists for circular economy in developing countries. And yeah, the examples we've seen and heard about today have basically all come from Europe and the Western world. But that, of course, doesn't mean that we should ignore the huge potential for emerging economies to really contribute to the transition to a circular economy. And, you know, if we're going to achieve that on a global scale, it's really key. So Sid, welcome. Thanks very much for being here. Just to start with, can you summarize in a nutshell what Kabadiwalla Connect is?
Yeah. So Kabadiwalla Connect is a tech-driven, data-centric social enterprise that integrates the informal sector into the formal waste management system. So some context, in the developing world, I think there's an OECD study that says that 80% of work is informal. And when we think about informality, especially in waste management, we think about the waste picker, but actually there's this incredible decentralized supply chain of people incentivized working to recover material. Starts with a waste picker who picks up material on the ground. He sells it to a Kabadiwalla, a small level 1 aggregator. They're called lapaks in Indonesia. There's actually names for them all across the developing world. These guys aggregate more volume, take that material, sell it to a level 2 aggregator, somebody outside the city, and then finally that material, depending on the type of material, goes to a formal processor or an informal processor. In India, for example, PET, the final person is a formal processor, which then Adidas and all of these guys buy material to say, wow, it's ocean plastic, or that kind of a thing. But with other types of material, now we're working now on commercial pilots to see how we can get volume from this informal sector in a way that improves the livelihoods of and the lives of the most marginalized stakeholders. So that's essentially what we do. To make that kind of like make it relevant from a business perspective, what we offer is traceability of material movement in the informal supply chain, traceability and compliance. But we also do collection, and we want to get into processing because we believe the informal sector is really a critical supply chain that needs to be engaged if we're serious about what a circular economy can mean. Not in the developing world, but globally.
Yeah, Great. So how did you get into that? What's your background?
So I'm a data scientist by training, so spatial data, so any data with a latitude and longitude I really like it. And I realized, my engagement with waste was in college when we used to organize beach cleanups. And we did it in a really cool way. It was a youth collective. We were all very bored with college. And we said, okay, why is there so much material coming onto the beach? And we started organizing cleanups. After a year and a half of working, we actually started asking questions. What are we doing? We're just moving waste from one place to another, from the beach to a landfill. And by the way, landfills in India and the developing world, you can't really call them landfills. They're like open dump sites. You know what I mean? So that really that got me interested, because when we were doing these cleanups, we saw waste pickers coming in and picking up specific types of materials. And when I looked at the literature, most people only talk about waste pickers, and they are the most marginalized people in the supply chain. But I was really interested, what does the ecosystem look like? And then, so we started mapping the informal supply chain of small traders, large traders, middlemen, all of these kinds of people. And what we actually have, the data shows us that it is a robust supply chain, something that's built around the notion of decentralization and material movement. And I think that, honestly, the West has a lot to learn from how that supply chain evolved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really key, isn't it? That what we're looking at really is quite a sophisticated system.
Yeah.
That is basically it's kind of invisible.
Yeah.
But so you're using technology really to leverage that system and kind of bring it to life.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. Like, I've gone to a lot of different kinds of pitches talking about what we do, and we typically get roped into this. You're like an Uber for waste. You're connecting the local Kabadiwalla to the household. I said, well, not really. I mean, yeah, we are geo-enabled. Hyperlocal is a focus, but we care about our vendors, We want the lives of waste pickers to improve. We want the lives of the Kabadiwallas to improve, and we need a social contract. So it's really exciting now to see, working with companies like Danone and Veolia in Indonesia, who share that idea of efficiency, is not just trying to sell a big processing machine and for some short-term gain, but really, what does it mean, the circular economy? And I think that there's a lot of conversation here as well, where people in different panels just ask, what does it mean?
Yep.
You know what I mean? And for me, just my 2 cents, I think for me, the circular economy, if it's really to be relevant to solve the big problems, the big challenges we have, it's about eliminating supply chain inefficiency. And it's about removing this idea of externalization. I think that supply chains here have a huge problem with externalizing the cost. Let's move our waste. And the worst example is, let's move our waste to Malaysia, and now that China is not taking it, let's move it somewhere else, right? But there's also a lot of subsidization that happens in the production centers, which are in the developing world, so that products here are cheaper, and it's just completely unsustainable, and something needs to change.
Yeah, and I think another key point really is, what Kabadiwalla Connect is doing is bringing a method that is kind of primed for where you're working, and we need to recognize that solutions for the Western world really don't work in India and other developing countries. And it needs a different
and also,
approach.
we need to question, with data, what does developed and developing really mean? I think that there's so many signals around consumption that's coming from the US and Europe and coming into the developing world that's absolutely unsustainable. And for me, I think that this data that we have is a kind of a good reminder about how things are built and how the idea of a decentralized supply chain, and about how eliminating externalities can really talk about what we mean when we say circular economy, which in my case is a more equitable world, something that we can pass on to our children and things like this.
So can you just give just a couple of examples of the specific projects that Kabadiwalla Connect are doing, just to make it a bit more real for people here?
Yeah, so the first is we've just launched a new video about a local collection service that we've just launched a pilot in my city, Chennai, India, which is a city in South India. There's a video on our website, kabadiwallaconnect.in, that you can see. Essentially, what we're doing is we're taking one small scrap shop, and providing the tools such that the waste pickers that sell to that scrap shop don't have to go to the landfill or don't have to go to open dump sites to pick up material, but rather through an IoT-enabled bin that we put in apartments and households. Now, the beauty of this is all the collection is around, let's say, 5 square kilometers. And one of the things that we started talking when we started engaging in municipality was like, you know what? There's the infrastructure. There are Kabadiwalla shops all across the city that can do this. And if we do something like this, their means of collection is actually on tricycles. So we can eliminate, I think it was millions of dollars of diesel cost of collection, this last mile collection, which is really this big challenge that we have. And I think that that's so exciting. I mean, can you imagine if we had a take-back infrastructure that didn't require petrol or diesel?
Exactly. Brilliant. So what would you say, since you started the Kabadiwalla Connect journey, what would you say your kind of key learning or a couple of your key learnings have been?
I think that, entrepreneurs have a lot to add. I think that there are like entrepreneurs who can communicate to audiences, and then there are entrepreneurs who want to put bread on their table for their family. And the Kabadiwallas, the Lapaks of the world do that, and they need to be recognized as a central part of the circular economy.
Awesome. Sid, thanks so much for coming. I think the key message for me is that really being able to leverage that informal sector is really critical for moving the transition of circular economy forward globally, and something that we really hope to keep working with you on. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
And without further ado, I believe main stage with the lovely Emma.
Thank you, Libby. So Peter Svensson has been pushing the fashion industry towards circularity already for years. Currently as a co-founder of Continued.Fashion, but let's go right back to the beginning. People might know you from the company Viga. It's a Danish company that rents out baby clothing. Through the rental model, you increase the utilization and therefore increase circularity. So let's go back to the idea and the beginning of Viga. What problem did you try to solve with that business model?
Actually, it started before. We had another kidswear brand at that time, 20 years ago. Just happened to be a father, and my wife, she was not interested in the designs at that time. So she thought everything she wanted to sew her own clothes. So she did. And her uncle was an entrepreneur himself and said, why don't you make a business out of it? If you like it, maybe somebody else will like it. So we started a brand, and that brand just took off with Scandinavian fashion for kids with 700% each year. So everything was fine and it was nice until one day. At that time, we didn't go to our manufacturers. We just made the designs, and a middleman would produce them for us. But at one time, after 2 years in, we thought, why don't we go there and have a look? So we did. And the idea was, when we came, we just saw this is not for kids. It was absolutely a chain of losers making that product.
It was what?
A chain of losers, if you looked at the supply chain somehow. So it was something that we just, out of pure indignity, said, okay, we can't have that growth, that product, at least not when we are doing a kid's product. So we wanted to change that, and we just started to engage with Christians of how to do it. We didn't know anything about it, but finding partners and finding some suppliers who were able to help and had the mindset of, okay, we want to do it, so also be decisive about it. We started to change out phase chemicals, do a very, very nice standard product that 10 years after thinking, okay, now we are superheroes, it's so perfect. We just started looking at how did the users actually use the product. Kids grow, clothes do not. So we actually come to this epiphany that after 10 years, we had made a pile of 1 million pieces of clothes. So maybe we could do it better. Maybe if you look at the usership, so when kids outgrow their clothes in 1 month and needs to have new clothes in 3 months and so on, maybe we can do a model where it's good for business and it's good for the parents, and then also look at the consumption even more.
And that was the beginning of Viga.
That was the beginning of Viga. So we actually had the other company closed to be decisive, and then we had already had high quality of products. So we knew that it was not a problem doing high quality that could be long-lasting and could make a revenue model of it, but we didn't know how the cultural aspects would be, so that was on the fly, we tested all that. But we built a new product designed for circular economy. That means also it had design changes for it. And also, we built a software solution around it. So it's two parts now, product and a brand, and also a tech solution. Because we needed the tech to have that circulation of the products going.
And then you moved on to Continued.Fashion. So what were the
Kind
challenges?
of, because we learned a lot in doing with the kids wear service. So it was, the idea already at the initiation of the company was to, let's demonstrate it can be done. So we wanted to work on going to a more generic solution for other people to use. So that's why we founded ultimately Continued.Fashion, which is now a platform that is a white label one that all brands can use to get experience and hands-on experience with running circular economy.
So it starts at a microchip, but it's much more than that, right?
I have one microchip in my pocket.
Can we show it to the audience?
Yeah, you can show it. My hands are too small or large.
I will show you to that. It's this small.
Yeah.
Could fit into your seam.
Yeah. It's just a number. So we use those to identify in some scanning points where the inventory are, because you have a lot of depots, plus suddenly you have your own warehouse, you have it in the transit between users, you have it in the cleaning facility, the maintenance part, or maybe at a user. So you need to be transparent to know where your goods are. So that's one part of the reason we use this one. The other one is to collect data. So we can know exactly each product that is unique, where it has been, and learn from it. So we can pick up from quality what is the best quality for service and how to better it. So we can give design feedback back to the design teams.
And what can brands do with this technology? How can they apply it?
Simply via the software, they get data crunching that will show them performance of lifetime or which maintenance points are there. A good example would be that if you wash your clothes a lot, the big surfaces will look nice, but a bend like this would start to wear before the big surfaces. So how to design that in a maintenance system even better would be one of the stuff you could look at by these data.
And where is it now? Is it already being used by brands? Are you still in a prototyping phase?
We have with the Danish top label called Ganni. They are launching here the first pilot after the summer. And we're also running with Bio, another top Danish company, some tests. And then we have people in the pipeline. So it's starting to happen for these brands. And it's easy to understand why, because it's already been productized. So there's a system where you can sandbox a circular retail experience, and you can do it agile and fast, and come out with some clear, successful criteria to decide in 6 months where to go from there. So it can be done now.
And in what kind of business models does this make most sense? Because you are familiar with like the rental model, the lease model, but can you also apply this in other types of circular business models?
I think you can do it in many things, but what we just try to do is try to see if there's a vertical or horizontal that can be examined actually by the brands who are now running on the platform. So you could rent, you could keep it at home if you fall in love with it, you can trade it in again, you can go on a subscription, let's say with a capsule for office, or do it in many, many ways, just to find a point where it gets to be a seamless new channel. So any way you want to dress is actually the visions here. Because I guess we all followed trends and fashion throughout our life. So not a question of how much we spend or how much we discarded, but what we want to do now. So we can build solutions around where it gets much more attractive to be a user in fashion. And first of all, fashion is about to be fun. And if we want future generations to have the same possibilities to express themselves with clothes, well, there needs to be a planet also. So it needs to be much more thoughtful as well. But can you be expressful in the paradigm between also acting good and also it works for the business, well, then we have something interesting going on, I think. So it's, from my experience, so much more effective to reuse products, and also data shows it, that it's up to 3,000% more effective to reuse this shirt again, compared to if you took a fishnet and tried to make them into a pair of shorts, for instance. So it makes sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Svensson.
Thank you.
For the final part of this episode, we're going to go to the Joes again. Thank you.
It's not the Joes, it's just one Joe this time, actually.
One Joe.
But I think that is plenty. There you have it. That was our tour through the circular economy. I was just checking some of the comments you've been sending in on Twitter. Amir said, it's like Tomorrow's World meets Top Gear meets the Money Program. Amir, you totally get what we were going for. Thank you. Julia loved Rhianna's straight talking. Libby was really into the idea of subscribing to your tunes with Gerrard Street. And Layla said there's no limit to the circular economy when we can turn orange peel into clothes. And that was the idea of tonight. That was the idea of our tour around the Roundhouse today, was to show you that the circular economy isn't fiction. It's not just a theory. It's not just a diagram, a set of principles, or a report. It's actually happening. The people we've heard from tonight are shifting the economy from linear to circular every single day. If you want more, you can watch the live stream tomorrow at thinkdiff.co. Numerous sessions on the circular economy taking place all day. Tune in at thinkdiff.co. But for now, thank you and good night.